All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started this evening. I'm sure additional folks will jump in and join us, but welcome everyone to our virtual ecology series. My name is Audrey Eisenhower. I'm the education director here, and joining me and other staff members, Carol Raymond, our volunteer manager, and we're really excited to have with us tonight Trudy, Battaly, and Drew Panko to talk to us about the elusive Saw-whet owl. Trudy and Drew are both bird banders and have been for a decade or more banding and studying saw-whet owls, which is what the work they're going to share with us tonight. They are both involved in hawk watches near them. Drew started and coordinates the Fire Island Hawk Watch. Trudy coordinates the Hook Mountain Hawk Watch on the Hudson River, and they are both on the board for the Northeast Hawk Watch Association. And Trudy edits the reports that are put together each year. So we are so excited to have them both with us tonight and to share their work and research on these elusive owls. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Trudy and Drew. Actually, one last bit of housekeeping. Since we can't see your faces tonight, we have two ways that you can participate. One is with the chat. You can put comments in or questions in the chat. And you can also use the Q&A feature there that should be on your menu option. If you put questions in there, they kind of get parked there. And at the end, we will relay them to Trudy and Drew so they can answer them there. So best place for questions is the Q&A, but feel free to put other chats or comments in the chat as we go along. All right, off to you, Trudy and Drew.
Okay, so we're very, very happy to be here tonight. And we actually are rather intrigued with the idea of being able to talk to you people who are now mostly, I presume, up in New Hampshire, while we're down in New York, in the suburbs of New York City. So we're going to share with you, and first I have to get to the right location. We're going to share with you what we've been doing. It's on the wrong location. All right, I'm sorry, folks. For some reason, it's starting in the wrong place. Sorry about that. Okay.
There was a sneak preview.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So what we thought we would do is to title our talk tonight, Saw-whets in Your Backyard, mostly because from the data that we've collected, we have come to realize that at least in this area of New York State and southeastern New York State, many of the saw-whets that we've tracked are actually in backyards. So we want to emphasize that in many instances, you can see these birds in your backyard. And of course, they have plenty to say. This is their advertising call, the male's advertising call. And they have other things that they utter, sometimes with twitters, sometimes with clicks. Twitters and clicks we hear very often in the hand, with the birds in the hand. And then sometimes when you're out going to the nets in the middle of a dark night, and it's a very busy night, if it happens to be a very busy night, because they're eruptive, they come in waves, more than one bird usually at a time. And sometimes you'll hear this, I think it's some kind of a warning call of some saw-whets telling there's someone coming down. There's a human on the way to the nets. So
here we are at Iona Island at nighttime. We caught a saw-whet on Iona Island. And here she is. She's a pretty hefty character, 103.1 grams.
The main sensory organs are visual as well as audio, and in order to see good,
the opposite in the direction I move it.
Move your head if your eyes are fixed in your head. Their eyes are fixed, so they have to be able to turn their heads any which way. 270 degrees is what the books say they move. And they can do that, such an extreme thing, because they have several more vertebrae than we do.
She seems to be happy.
Sometimes they don't want to leave you. Your hand is warm and the night is cold. All right. When we started this, there were several problems. Things we didn't understand about Saw-whets, and we wanted to find out. And since there was so much we didn't know about Saw-whets, we were trying to get as much data as possible. So we were banding them in spring and fall migration. Turns out fall migration, you can get many more than we can in the spring. We searched their winter roost sites. They do roost in the winter in our area, sometimes for long periods of time, and we'd search for them. We wanted to put a tracking radio on them and track the movements of individuals that we knew where they started from and where they ended up. We were going to search for local breeders and did, but they've been very scarce. We also doing a study with the stable hydrogen isotopes. Now, theoretically, this should tell us how far north they are when they grow the feathers, but we have not had much success in making sense out of the data. We've had very strange results on the stable hydrogen isotopes, and it probably reflects the fact that these birds really wander long distances with no real goal in mind. They just wander around. All right, here's this data cleared up our first question. The first question was, when we see an eruption of Saw-whet owls, is that good news for the owls or bad news for the owls? And in other words, is it because they had a good breeding season and a lot of young came down? Or is it because they had a crash in their prey base and everybody's starving up there, so they come down and eat our mice? And if you look at the data, the first light blue thing is for birds that we have banded in that are less than a year old. Okay, L is for local. We only had 6 birds that were fledglings locally. We found them within several hundred feet of their nest site. Or in hatching year birds are the birds that hatched that year and decided to come south and visit, spend the winter with us. Second year birds are birds that we banded in the spring, but they hadn't bred yet. In other words, they hatched out in the spring and they went through a year migration cycle, and then we caught them on their way north again. These second year birds are different. These are birds that spent a year on the breeding grounds and are now headed north. Third year birds, after hatching year birds, after second year birds, after third year birds. And you can see how it divides up. 59% of all our captures of hatching are of hatching year birds. And only 41% are adults. And you can also see in the years, for instance, 2007, most of the birds are hatching year birds, 76 compared to 23. In 2010, 61 versus 28. Okay, in 2011, it's not. No hatching year birds and 18 second year birds. So what we're seeing is in the birds that where we have the high numbers, high total banded,
You can circle those.
If we get a lot of birds down, it's because we get a lot of hatching year birds. and only a few second year and third year birds. So the conclusion you can come to, and other people have found this out since, it wasn't known when we started, but it is now well known that the reason they come south in the winter is because they had a good breeding year and they're just spreading out. The ratio of males, females, and unknowns is 72% females, 10% males, 18% unknowns. And we believe most of those unknowns are just particularly small females. As in most raptors, the males are smaller than the females. And why we capture 72% females and only 10% males, it is not known with absolute certainty. At first, we thought it might be the lure we use. We use an audio lure to draw them in, and maybe the females were coming in to the male audio lure and the males were avoiding it. But that's not likely the answer. The answer is the males want to stay as far north as possible to be close to their breeding territories, to defend their breeding territories from any intruders coming in and try to steal their mice. The females don't worry about the mice. They don't worry about the breeding territories. They don't even try to get back to the same breeding territory that they were in last year. They just go where the winds blow them, and the mice are fat and sassy.
And we also know that the predominance that we have moving south are females, not only from all of our banding data, but for our winter on site data, where we actually did visual searches for the owls. And when we did that, we got the predominance of females as well.
Thank you.
So this is, of all the places that we ban, all right, that's Westchester Community College. And we would release the birds in that bush over there. You can see the map in relation to Connecticut and Massachusetts, and zooming in a little bit closer. We've banded at a number of different sites. Our major site is Westchester Community College. 81% of our birds were banded there. We also banded at Pelham Bay, which is a New York City park, all right, in the metropolitan New York area, and excuse me, the northerly, the northeast, and it's right on Long Island Sound. 8% of our birds were banded there, and that was mostly winter. That was actually almost entirely just winter birds. And then we banned in Harriman, and we banned in a couple of different areas in Harriman. We have it separated into the northern section and the southern section, and collectively in Harriman, we banded 8% of the birds. Now, we've also banded at Croton Point Park and at Gateway National Wildlife Refuge. We did that for a number of years. It was a little bit problematic getting across the big city to get down to band early in the morning all the time. So we didn't stick with that for too many years, but we did about 1% of our birds from there. So, and then a couple of other isolated individuals at Edith Reed and Sterling Forest. And what's very interesting is that we have a number of our birds are recaptures. When you ban birds in general, and I'm sure many of you have seen banding operations, when you ban general passerines, for instance, you do not get a 6.1% recapture rate. The recapture rate for saw-whet owls is rather extraordinary, and it is because of the manner in which we capture the birds, and that is using an audio lure and a net. So we're selectively calling in those species, and we're calling them into the nets, and it works very well. So that there are a number of sites all over the country, and even in Canada, where we have banding data. And you can see that most of our recaptures are along the eastern seaboard. Now, what's interesting is, and this is not really up to date, we actually have 51 birds now that are recaps. And there we have one, for instance, from Quebec. We have one from the Adirondacks that moved into Vermont, was recaptured in Vermont. And then we caught it down here in Harriman in the springtime on its way back north again. So, and we've had a couple of birds from Pennsylvania as well. So it fills in this whole eastern seaboard, the birds that we've gotten. Up here at the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, we have one from Maine. We don't have any from New Hampshire that I recall, though. So you people have to get busy up there.
Chase them down.
So, but what shows here is that the birds in yellow are, at least the marks in yellow here, were banded and recaptured in the same season. So for instance, this yellow one that's a circle, it says 23 days. That's a bird that was banded in northwestern Massachusetts, and 23 days later, we caught it down here with this big star, that's WCC, where we get most of them. And certainly in the fall for a bird like that. There was one from Maine that we caught 12 days later. What's interesting, the square ones are the ones that we banded first and were recaptured elsewhere. So look at this one right here. There's two of them right here, two birds that we banded at Westchester Community College. One 19 days later went back north and was recaptured. Another one 15 days later went back north and was recaptured. So we're really learning a lot about the fact that they don't follow a direct route. They just roam around wherever the food is. And there's a general tendency in those years that are eruption years for them to move southerly, but they go to where the food is, and more than any other species I know of. And that's rather amazing. The blue boxes are ones we banded and were banded later on in a different season. And this is one that was banded by somebody else, and we recaptured in a different season. So you can see we've got some down in the Chesapeake Bay, and they are spread about all over the place. And so it's interesting in that one of the things we wanted to do was to find out where these birds are coming and going from. And so that is part of what we are successful in accomplishing in this way.
All right, all kinds of things happen when you're banding owls. We were out, we captured an owl, and when we went to weigh it, the battery was dead in our scale. So we had to come up with something quick. I happened to have a meter stick in the back of my truck. Doesn't everybody have a meter stick in the back of their trucks? And we set up an unequal balance, and knowing we brought the bags home, weighed the bags, and knowing the distance of each bag at the balance point, we could calculate the mass of the owl.
So that's we did it for that bird, and this was winter banding, and in the winter we band in the daytime. So this is when, of course, we were not outdoors in the wintertime. This was inside in the fall, where we actually had a small facility at Westchester Community College that was not really being used for anything else. And they allowed us to use this facility for banding. So we're indoors, and we do have a scale. And you can see that this owl is 95.5 grams, and we tiered it out ahead of time. So that's the actual owl weight. Now, when we're radio tracking, one of the things that we need to do with radio tracking is to be sure that anything that is applied to the bird and put on the bird is less than or no more than 3% of the owl's mass. So what we have to do is, I don't know if you can see it, but there is a harness on here. It's a black harness that's an elastic item, and there's a little white tubing that holds the two pieces of harness together in the front. And we, with this elastic, fit it to the owl, all right? Well, we have to make sure that collectively what we put on the owl is less than 3% of the owl's mass. So we mass out our transmitters, and of course we mass the owl. So we know whether or not we're within the limits. Now, actually, this is a 2.8 gram transmitter with harness, and we have a lot smaller ones now. This was one of our first original transmitters that we remembered to take a picture of. We haven't remembered much in recent times to take one of the smaller ones. Generally speaking, they're about 2 grams, maybe 2.1. 1.8. They're somewhere in that neighborhood. So we actually can get them on small owls now than we did originally.
And if you're not familiar with grams, easy way to remember is 1 nickel weighs 5 grams. So this is the less than the weight of a half. The modern radios are less than half of the weight of a nickel.
Yep. So why do we do this? We want to check out what habitats these birds are using, what species of trees or shrubs or whatever they're roosting in, so that we can get some kind of an idea about that. How long do they stay in the area if we're banning them in migration? And then in the wintertime, how long do they stay near a winter roost, for instance? Do they use the same roost regularly? Or do they use multiple roosts, so we could track them down that way? It's been very helpful. And this is the bird with a transmitter on, you can see it. And the birds do like to talk to us sometimes when we're holding them. Sometimes they click at us and sometimes they twitter at us.
That's angry talk.
And of course, that's where the transmitter is on the back of the owl.
All right. The results, it was very exciting. The first radios we put on are the owls. The first one we put on, we were very, very careful. We didn't put it on until we knew we got the radio on and could release it long before daylight. We found a dense stand of evergreen trees and put them in a dense stand of evergreen trees. And he stayed in the vicinity for about a week, but he never went near the evergreens again. He spent the rest of the week in a little 1/4 acre patch of deciduous woodland. The second bird we put on, we again tried to make sure we got him out before dawn broke. And we stood at the edge of a parking lot and let him fly into the tree at his own. He only stayed for 1 day, but he stayed in the same tree. And what was strange to us was that it was a deciduous tree, a Norway maple that still had its leaves on. You couldn't see him from the ground. Norway maples with leaves are good hiding places for saw-whet owls. And as long as there's leaves on the Norway maples, they use them strongly, frequently.
Okay, so at Pelham Bay, we actually tried the transmitters as well. And our first owl, we put a transmitter on, and of course, this is still new to us and everything. And so we were very anxious to find out where it went. So we let it go first, we didn't follow it immediately, but we checked it 3 hours after release. And of course, we could still hear the beeping and everything. We knew it was in the area, but in 3 hours time, we went and decided to go and see where it was. And we found it on a log hunting. It was no more than 2 feet above the ground. And that was our first real learning thing. Oh, actually the second. Drew's with the deciduous woods was the first thing that we learned with tracking. This one showed us that they hunt from very close to the ground. And of course they're hunting mice. So why in the world didn't I think about that? But I never thought about it before. They hunt from very close to the ground. And in fact, on many occasions, Drew always wanted to go and check them at night and find out where they were. And when we had them in the middle of the woods at Westchester Community College at night, anytime we did find them, they were always within 4 to 5 feet of the ground every single time because they were hunting. Okay. So the next day, this particular guy, or actually it was a girl, most of them are, was way up in those trees, way up in those trees. We knew where she was, but we couldn't actually see her. But we knew that she was up there, and what we could see up to was 45 to 50 feet high, and she wasn't within that space that was visible to us with binoculars. All right. We were looking up that high. So that was another thing we learned. Almost the first times were putting these transmitters on these owls, we're learning all these things about them. And that is that these birds do roost at very high elevations. We'd always been told by other birders and birders experienced people that these saw-whets only roosted low, you know, in rhododendrons and low shrubs and things like that. But this was a March bird, and the March bird headed its way north, presumably. We don't really know, but presumably. And 3 days later, it was no longer there. It was on its way through migration.
Another chance happenstance that told us a lot was we were tracking a radio transmitter, and we found it coming from a very shrubby, thorny patch, and we cut our way through it. You can see the rose thorns here and the vines here. And I laid down the antenna right at the tip of the radio that came off the owl. When we first started putting the radios on, we were being very, very careful, and they were getting them off. But when they get them off, that tells you something also. It tells you where they were. And he was sitting on this log about 2 feet off the ground under a dense layer of a tangle of vines, deciduous vines and shrubs and roses. And you can see the advantage of being up a little bit off the ground if you're hunting something that's running along the ground. Of course, then you jump down on the little guy. And that seems to be what they like to do. That third one that we had down in Pelham Bay that was hunting 2 feet off the ground too, they want to be close enough to get them fast, but higher than the mouse.
And just a point of clarification, down here on the ground, that's exactly what the ground was. We only cleared out the shrubs around it, or the tangles actually, to get into it.
The ground is so clear because the shade from the overlying shrubs is so dense that nothing will grow on the ground.
Okay, so this is one of the birds that we radio tracked and that actually hung around for a while. Many of our birds, we'd put a radio on and they might stay one day. Sometimes they didn't even stay a day. They flew off that night with it. So of course the radios disappeared kind of quickly. But this is one of those that we actually hung around for a while. You can see from November 19th to December 25th. She was a Christmas Day bird. Christmas Day, Christmas night, we no longer could find her anywhere. So she left on Christmas in a snowstorm, mind you. She left in a snowstorm. So, because we'd picked her up the night before, Christmas Eve. So, this is, we called her Arby because she liked a set of arborvitae really quite extensively. We would find her in arborvitae very, very regularly. So this is the area that we're in. This is the Kensico Reservoir, Westchester Community College. This is the place we released her. And the yellow is daytime observations. The blue is nighttime observations. You can see we have a lot of nighttime observations and different areas that she's in. So this is a 350 acres in general and 168 acres where she spent many, many, many of her nights. All right. And during the time that she was here. And you can get a little closer look at that area. It's right next to a highway. This is the Springbrook Parkway. She actually utilized that bunch of trees inside the circle on the on-ramp. This is the arborvitae series in here. Look at how many days she was in that arborvitae, and that is in a backyard. All right, so that's the backyard of a home, and she spent a lot of days in the backyard of homes. Same bird.
Same bird we're tracking, and we were getting a signal, but we couldn't see a bird. We couldn't see a bird. We couldn't see a bird. Oh, now we see the bird. They're good at hiding, and shrubs are a good place to hide. And it's very hard for a predator to get into a thick tangle of brush. They get in very easily. They land on the outside and walk in, okay? And they love to roost in tangles.
So again, the same bird, this time in bamboo. So this one bird we learned so much about. It's the only time we ever had a bird in bamboo, actually, but then again, there aren't very many places around that have bamboo. This bamboo was at the back of a commercial nursery. And so it was not easy to get into to actually get these photographs. It was very tough. Bamboo was very close growing together. So of the 30 daytime roosts that we had for the bird, 25 of them were in backyards, 25 of them. And that's 83% of the daytime roosts were in backyards. So backyards, even though we had all of this open, this is WCC campus, even though we had all of this open wooded area on WCC, she only spent, this is where the tangles were over here on the right side, the third day. No, okay, this is where the tangles were over in here in the third day, but she was over here in the early morning of the third day. Okay, so it's very interesting for us to have learned all of that. Now, granted, our habitat, a lot of our habitat is in residential areas, but you know, there's a lot of open space that was available as well in these conifers in this green section that really was very little used in comparison to up in here. Now, this was an area that had some disturbance in it, and Drew can tell you about that.
All right, the disturbance, it's DOT, Department of Transportation land, and they were doing work in there, and they were having their lunches in there, and they were throwing their garbage everywhere. And I suspect one of the reasons she spent so much time up there was the garbage was drawing the mice, and the mice was drawing the Saw-whet.
That's the arborvitae she was in.
And this is where she flew off one morning after she woke up. This is the place where they were in the DOT land, where they were at night, where they were hunting mice. This is the work area. They were having lunch down here.
Okay, so that gets us to the next one that we had for 24 days. And we're probably not going to spend quite as much time on this one, but this was one we called Piney, because she stayed in a white pine every day for, well, not every single day, but a lot of days. And 17 days, 12 of the 17 days she was in backyards. And of course, the pine tree was right in here. No, I don't know if that, no, I think it was this one up here. She was there many of those 17-day roosts.
And invisible.
Yeah, it was, she was way up at the top of that. All right, so this is Piney. And I'm not sure that we should take the time to go through all of this. But here the green is always the site of release, and this is Westchester Community College property. She actually was in a residential neighborhood very close to the college property, moved around a little bit. This is the sequence of movement for this bird. And notice that there is quite a bit of development in here. There's industrial development, there's some office buildings, there's a theater in here. And over in this section where we can also see in a minute, there are a FedEx building and a Coca-Cola bottling plant. So this is where the Saw-whet is staying. Imagine that. Instead of on WCC property, there's also adjacent to WCC in the southern section, there's a school for the deaf property that has a lot of open woods on it. And yet these owls are going, and it's not just one now. This is the second one we saw doing this, going back and forth from residential areas to some wooded areas at night, but in the daytime, they're staying in residential areas and moving around. We have a golf course down here, practically no time on the golf course. So what are they doing? Why in the world are they using these habitats instead of what we would expect them to be using. And they're obviously after food, and that's where they're finding the mice. They need mice more. They do have a somewhat varied diet, but for the most part, they eat small mammals. And so they need these mice to feed on. And so that would be the FedEx building in here. There's a little parking lot. I saw it from the parking lot in there. And over here is the Coca-Cola bottling plant. This is the Sawmill River Parkway. This is the Springbrook Parkway. So we're stuck in an urban suburban area here, and these owls are spending their time in these places. Now, granted, probably in Pennsylvania or maybe in northern Massachusetts or even maybe in New Hampshire, perhaps they're spending more time in woody areas that are providing more in the way of food sources for woodlands than they are here. So that's the pine tree that we named her for in the backyard. And that would be this tree right here. And that's why she was named Piney. She would sit at the top of this tree in the daytime and then fly over the Springbrook Parkway to go hunting at night, and then come back and sit in the top of the pine tree again the next day. So amazing, just amazing behavior on the part of these owls. And so that's the place where she spent the night. Now, let's see.
You have a picture of the FedEx.
And this is the FedEx building right here. And the place that she was, a little parking area. I was standing in the parking area looking at her from the parking area. And then she followed this is the Sawmill River. And so she followed some of that area, and you could see there could easily be found mice in there.
All right, one sub-study that we did was try to decide where they during the day and to find them there. And we took note of the plants that they roosted on. White pine and arborvitae and tangles were the three most important sites, accounting for 47%, 16%, and 14% of their purchase. Now, arborvitae and white pine are not evenly distributed. There's very little arborvitae in our area, and what arborvitae there is mostly in backyards. So they seem definitely to prefer the arborvitae. And the white pine is native. They're often mature trees, 40, 50 feet high. So they do use them extensively. The surprise for us with the tangles, we would have never found them in all those tangles unless we had radios on them and we were willing to cut and bulldoze our way through roses and thorns and all kinds of vines. We saw a few in cedar, some in holly, some in spruce, very few in spruce. Yew turned up, which is not common in our area. Even bamboo turned up. Scotch pine didn't seem to be very favored. All right, so overall, they mostly were in the conifers. This is the standard intelligence you get from birders. That's where they're found. They're also found in tangles, which very few birders know about. And they do not shy away from deciduous woods if there are any leaves left on the trees.
So this was another one. Nope.
No, it's all right.
Yeah. If you haven't guessed, the little icon up at the top means that it's Drew slide. I'm sorry about that. I started speaking out of turn. But anyway, this is Blondie because her wing coverts, her primary and secondary coverts, were this light colored blonde color. And what's interesting about Blondie is not only that she's unique in that characteristic, other saw-whets don't have that, but she stayed on campus more than any other bird. And this is WCC campus. I was beginning to think that the campus either had no mice on it, or that perhaps the fact that there are great horned owls and screech owls around limited the saw-whet time, the time that they spent there. But go ahead, Drew.
And if you want to see, this area is a shrubby tangle of vines full of roses and so forth, where she would spend the days. Right next to her is a stand of planted evergreens, mature evergreens, 60 feet tall, densely packed. And she avoided them like the plague and went right for the thorns. So I had to spend hours in getting to her.
Okay, so one of the things that we did was to document how high up the birds were roosting when we found them on roost. All right, our winter study, we went looking in conifer areas of places that we expected to find them. And when we did find a saw-whet roosting, before we banded it or anything, what we did was to keep track of all kinds of things. We documented the type of plant that she was in, and you saw the data for that. We documented how high we estimated the height of the roost site. All right. And we also did things like how far away from the nearest branch is their face? How close to the tree trunk is it? Well, what ended up being important was that they were always had branches and needles right close to their face within 2 to 3 inches, always. So they really liked—
Or less.
Yes, or less, or being touching their face. They really liked being undercover. We actually had one here in this tangle right here. There was one up in there, but they like having their face and their head covered very close proximity. But we estimated the height. We did a pretty good job with estimation. And with a lot of the pine trees, it's relatively easy because the branches are spaced so nicely. But so we estimated the heights, and overall with 206 observations, most of the birds were within 1 to 10 feet. So this graph, the number of feet, the height is basically at the bottom. And the y-axis is the frequency, the number of times we found birds at those heights. So from 1 to 10 feet high, that was the highest grouping. All right, from 10 to 20 is the next highest. And you could see that the higher up, the lower the number we found. Now, the fact that we found any birds above 40 was either because of telemetry or because of Larry Fisher, because Larry is the supreme saw-whet owl finder. He can find any saw-whet. If there's one around, he's the one who can find it, even if it's very, very high in the tree. And Larry was working with us in the winter time, in the winter studies. So you can see that overall, there were more owls that we observed at lower elevations than at higher elevations, and the average height was 22.3 feet. Now, what we did was to separate that data. That data on the previous page, this data is all of the observations that we had. All right. Now, that all of those observations are now divided up into those that we found visually and those that we found using telemetry. All right. So these are what we were capable of finding visually. And again, those upper ones, probably visually, those are Larry's, right? He found those. Now we might have been able to find the wash, but the problem is that if a bird is very high in a conifer stand, you cannot find the wash. There's no wash, there's no pellets on the ground. Usually you can look for pellets, but when they're very high in these stands, the pellets get dispersed apparently on the way down. There's no wash to be seen. So Larry was really, really good at finding that. So you can see that we have quite different shapes, but generally speaking, we did have more birds at the lower elevations anyway. So to some extent, that's pretty good confirmation that most of the birds are roosting lower, because this telemetry is where they went after we released them, and we went looking to find them. Where were they?
With the radio.
With the radio. They had radios on. These birds had radios on. So you could see that we did get higher, a little bit above 60 feet, some of them. And then we had more at the 50 to 60 feet level, and certainly more at the 40, and even more than visually at the 30. So up in this area was what was very interesting. Who knows what's going on with this lack of 20 feet where in the 21 to 30 feet, they apparently don't prefer that area, even though we were finding them in that latitude, that height, excuse me, when we look for them visually. So and our visual searches had an average of 19.6 feet high, and the telemetry was 26.2 feet high. But our data set wasn't large enough to show a significant difference. And so we couldn't say statistically that they were really different, but the shapes of them are different using chi-square distribution for shapes distribution. So very interesting data that we have here from this, and the telemetry was the giveaway that we really do have some birds that roost very high.
All right, one day we were coming back from the beach, watching hawks, and the sun was setting, and we had a radio on a Saw-whet in Pelham Bay, so we went to check on him, and it was just perfect timing. This bird had been sitting in those pines all day long, and with the setting sun, he came out to for his morning absolutions, and he lightened his load, and he threw up a pellet, and he just kind of looked around for a little while, and he was ready for a night's hunting. They almost always throw a pellet before they go hunting. There's a bird in my hand. I'm not holding him at all. Now, this is the normal head movement you see for a bird that is relaxed in the open and just doing his thing. That first bird we showed you that was fixated on a point is unusual. It only happens in when they're captive. This normal, very active head movement. This is why he has all those extra neck vertebrae, so he can cover high, low, and in between. He can't move his eyes, remember, so he's got to move his head.
And we're releasing an owl.
And he could leave me anytime he wanted and fly off.
And she's a beauty.
Just didn't want it.
She weighs 102.8 grams.
Around
pretty hefty
this
character.
time, my hand was getting tired. And I started wiggling my hand to hope to get him to go. And he
There
did.
she goes.
And what we did, one of the other birds at Croton Point, we released and it flew into a bush. And to our surprise, it flew up to the window. From the bush, it looked into the window. It was really very curious. It had been inside that room being banded, what, 10 minutes prior to this. And so it was very curious. And the images that you see is a reflection in the window of what's in the room. And of course, this I had to throw in because you got to check out Drew's expression. So that was the expression was there.
If we were going to summarize it, where do you find the saw-whets in the winter? During the day, heavy cover with a few hundred feet, within a few hundred feet of a shrubby field or wetland. Thick evergreens are probably the best way and common knowledge, particularly if they have overlapping branches between two different evergreens. They really like to sit in between on the edge of one branch with branches from the other one coming over. They like the thorny shrubby growth full of vines under the thick canopy of vines. And backyard evergreens. Now, those last are not listed in any particular order. I'd probably say that's all about the same, whether it's shrubby or vines or backyard evergreens. The way to find them is to look for their pellets, all right, and look for their wash. This is a pellet. This is a fresh pellet. This is an old pellet, about a month old. It's been sitting, it's beating to break itself apart. And this is the wash. You can see the bird, and the white streak underneath the bird is the wash that's caught on which you can follow that wash sometimes all the way back up the tree, and it'll lead you right to the owl if he uses the tree. Sometimes they're very consistent about using one particular perch day after day after day. Sometimes they'll use one perch and never be seen in it again. If you want to find a breeding saw-whet, the males call incessantly, March to May, only in full darkness. They use flicker or pileated holes or nest boxes. They're likely to avoid territories with screech owls or barred owls, but they don't mind great horns in the vicinity. Mixed woods, they nest in deciduous trees. Males roost in the nearby evergreens. They like a good hunting territory. Houses have a lot of nice thorny shrubby fields, and wetlands do as well. You can find the male from pellets or wash. Insects flying around at the entrance, attracted by the odor of the scat and decaying prey items. They are not tidy housekeepers. It's also likely that the males themselves eat insects, all right, but they feed the mice to the females and the young. The fledged young will be attracted by the male advertising call. They're looking to get fed.
And none of these people live in New York State.
And none, yes. And none of you live in New York
So are
State.
they in your backyard? This is the hole where we found some, James found the hole. Larry actually helped retrieve the birds for us. This is the female looking out of the hole when she was nesting. And there's one of the fledglings. The adult male weighed less than 78 grams, but all the owlets were bigger than him. So he was a really good provider. He really was good, and very successful.
There's another fledgling we got up in Sterling Forest. It's a very dark looking bird, and it looks like a really skinny bird. Well, he's not. He's perfectly normal sized. He is just not happy with my presence. And I think he saw us capture his brother or sister, and he didn't want any part of us. And when you see a saw-whet like this, that looks very skinny, stop, don't get any closer. He'll fly away. You don't want him to fly during the day because then he attracts predators, particularly Cooper's hawks. And with a cute little face like that, you don't want a Cooper's hawk to feast down on him.
This is the one of the two that we actually were successful in getting.
Conclusions were the saw-whets select their sites with good cover. Most owls roost at more than one roost site. Some roost sites are particularly attractive, though. They're used by the same owl multiple days in a row and or in different years by different owls. Again, many days in a row. Conifers are preferred winter roost sites. Deciduous trees are utilized before they leaf fall. Tangles are used during both fall and all winter. And so it's actually roost at higher elevations in the vegetation than we normally find them.
So in order to find saw-whets, they're everywhere. They're in the woods, they're in the residential areas. They can even be in office and industrial areas. So be sure to check your yard and your neighborhood and look for the pellets and wash. And these are our study people. Drew did the isotopes and telemetry. I'm the principal investigator and bander. Larry was the primary search and capture. He did a fantastic job of capturing the owls. And of course, these are the places where we banded, and we're so very thankful to these places for having us and supporting us and hosting us on these sites. Scott Wiedensaw taught us how to do the backpack on the birds. And we've had many, many people who have helped us banding during the banding. Some people have actually supported us to some extent by helping us purchase some of the transmitters. And we're just grateful to everybody. It's been wonderful working with everybody. So are there any questions? Whoop, I did the wrong thing. Sorry about that. I'm gonna stop my share. There we go.
All right. Well, thanks, Trudy and Drew. That is really interesting, and I can tell you all enjoyed your research and your adventures too. I was wondering if you have thought about, and I'm sure there's other researchers that have done this, but have you ever looked into any satellite tracking so you can think about where these birds are going once they leave you?
We did think about the Modus towers at one point, and some of the problem is that we were thinking about that with the solar transmitters, and you need to have something that's going to last long enough for it to be recognized in other locations at other times. The transmitters that we used in order to make them light enough were transmitters that had batteries that only lasted up to 3 months. Have we thought about the satellite? The satellite transmitters are too heavy to be within 3% of the owl's weight. The transmitters from the Modus towers require, in order to be on for a longer period of time, are solar powered. And there hasn't been any success so far with solar powered transmitters that I know of with Saw-whets, because they're always in the shade or active at night. So to get the energy for the, the solar, they're not out in the sunshine. So we know that Bruce Wiedensaw, I believe, was going to investigate that. He did some of that and was not happy with the outcome. So we're still struggling with that and hoping to maybe upgrade with something that will be useful and functional, but at this point, we're not sure what.
But the technology keeps increasing.
Yeah.
It keeps getting better and cheaper. And I have hopes in the future for the Modus, particularly because Canada is heavily invested in them, in Modus. And if we can get somebody interested in putting up to $10,000 for the tower, and we can take care of the tags, it'll be helpful.
Yeah, interesting enough, Ian McLeod, our executive director here at the Science Center, just today was helping to install a Modus tower locally.
Yeah.
So we have one that will be, at least one, I think two, that are going to be part of the Squam watershed here. So that's exciting.
That's great. Yeah.
We do have someone that has been with us this evening that is from Queens, New York. So she appreciated the New York State info. So welcome, Susan. We're glad you joined us. Olivia had a speculation. She was thinking about that 21 to 30 foot level. And is it possible that there's predators at that level that make it a height that they're not using, do you think?
It's a possibility. I think that the greatest problem for the Saw-whets might be birds like Cooper's hawks. So that is, I think, well, it may be a possibility. I'll have to think about it, but certainly from the fact that they like being under tangles and very well hidden from the air, it's strong suggestion that they're more worried about aerial predators than raccoons and climbers up the tree. So that's a thought to think about, whether or not coops would be a problem. We do know that coops are a problem for Saw-whets. They are a problem for any bird,
And at night, of course, other owls are the problem. We know for sure that the screech owls will take the Saw-whets and even hunt them.
and barred owls.
And barred owls. They will avoid barred owls like the plague. We have no evidence for long-eared owls being a problem, or great horned owls seem to ignore the Saw-whets entirely. The Saw-whets are probably faster and more maneuverable, and the great horns can't catch them.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'll definitely be looking in the tangles a bit more than I have before.
Yay.
Eric has a question. He was just wondering if you know of any other studies or study sites that have found the saw-whets in backyards or developed areas as much as y'all did there, especially up here in our way, northern New England.
No, I have never seen any published paper, but we haven't published it either, except on various Zoom meetings and try to make it as widely known as good. There could be somebody else tracking it. It tends to be a little troublesome because you'll put the radio on the bird and he'll fly off immediately. It won't even stay 2 hours. He'll continue his migration, and that's $150 down the pike. We only get about a 2-mile range at the maximum from him. So as soon as he's 2 miles away, we're in trouble. The other thing is keeping track of them once you have the radio on is a real problem. You have to visit them sometime in the dark to see where he's roosting at night, where he's hunting at night. And where he's hunting at night, he may not stay in the same place. He may move from one place to another. So you'd like to hit him at least 2 times at night. 3 would be even better. Okay. And then you want to try and find him in the morning. And in the morning, once you find him, he'll be there all day. You don't have to worry. But I kind of like to go there at sundown and watch where he heads off at night when he comes out of the cover and what direction he heads in. But that's I think so. That's 4 or 5 visits to the owl a day. Some of them will take 10 minutes if he's where you think he might be. And some of them may take 2 or 3 hours, and that has a way to interfere with the rest of your life and labors. The lawn often doesn't get mowed then.
You need a battery of college students,
Yes,
graduate students to do the work for you.
with no regular jobs to deal with.
Always helpful.
But we found that the birds that we put transmitters on early in the migration season in fall were birds that flew off with the transmitter very soon, either that night or within a couple of days. But the birds that hung out longer were birds that we banded in November and put transmitters on. So we did learn that. And in the meantime, of course, we lost some transmitters. But we have had recoveries of owls, and the transmitters are designed to fall off the birds. The connection points are not tied closed. They're wrapped in cotton thread, so that when the cotton thread wears off, or the bird can even take it off, it will fall off the bird, because the battery doesn't last long enough for it to be meaningful to, to call up somebody downstream and say, hey, our bird just left the area, go out and check for it, which some people could presumably do. But so the transmitters, the harness is designed to fall off the bird.
Battery lasts about 6 weeks if it's brand new.
Great. Well, I want to thank you both so much for joining us this evening and sharing your work. Always fun to spot a saw-whet owl in the wild, and great to learn a bit more about some of their habits and choices where we can look to find them. So thank you again for being here tonight, Drew and Trudy, and thanks to everyone who joined us. We certainly appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing folks again in the future.
And thank you for having us. And I hope you find some saw-whets in your backyard.
We'll have to come up and visit you sometime.
Please do. Yeah, we'd love to have you.
Good.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.